Hey guys, I'm T and welcome to the channel. If you're new here, we make trendy and fun crochet tutorials twice a week. And if you haven't already, smash that like button, drop a comment down below, and subscribe to join in on the fun. For today's tutorial, we're keeping the cozy sweater vibes going with a comfy v-neck that features an overlapping neckline, simple stitches, and a plunging V that's perfect for when you're feeling flirty or worn over something else. Either way, you're sure to turn heads with this looker. Speaking of, if you're looking for more head-turning crochet designs, you are in the right place. We have hundreds of stylish modern crochet tutorials and patterns with even more dropping twice weekly, so consider clicking the bell to subscribe and you'll never miss an upload. Also, do me a huge favor and give this video a big thumbs up if you like it, or 2 thumbs down if you don't. Either way, it's a great way to show support so I can keep putting out free tutorials every Wednesday and Sunday. Now, it's time to get on the show, so without further ado, for this project, any category 4 yarn will work, but I used a total of 560 grams of yarn. That's 1,250 yards if you're stateside. As for tools, a 5.5mm hook, scissors, stitch markers, and a tape measure. There is a written pattern down below. Use offer code TCDDIY for a discount off any $9.99 plus order, and enter this week's pattern giveaway by telling us what material you prefer to wear to keep warm and toasty, fleece or wool. Fleece has always been my go-to for sweating material. Details for the giveaway down below. We are using 4 stitches for this project, and they'll be as follows. Chain, slip stitch, single crochet, half double crochet, and double crochet. This tutorial is made for a size small, but you can adjust it for your size, and we explain how to in the video, so let's get started. Getting this sweater started, we're all going to grab our category 4 yarn and make a slip knot. Then we're all going to grab our 5.5mm hook. Then start by making an even number chain that starts at the top of our shoulder down to where like the bottom of the sweater to be, so you can make this cropped or full length. I'd like for mine to be full length, so I'm going to start by making a chain that is 18 inches or 45 centimeters. That's a chain 70 for me. Now that we have our chain, we're going to get started on our row 1. Now this is going to be a 3-row repeat, and the first row is going to be an alternate stitch row. So we're going to block off that last chain and do a chain 1. That chain 1 does not count as a stitch. And our alternate stitch is just going to be 2 single crochets into the same chain. So what we're going to do is single crochet twice into the 3rd chain from our hook. So here's 1, here's 2, here's 3. Into that 3rd chain, we're going to bring our hook down and insert with 2 single crochets. So insert, pull through 2, into that same chain, insert, pull through 2. Now that is 1 alternate stitch set complete. From here, after we have our 2 single crochets, we're always going to skip 1 stitch, and then into the next, another set of 2 single crochets. So there's 1, into that same stitch with a 2nd single crochet. That's basically it till we reach the end of the row. Let's just do a few more together. After our 2 single crochets, skip the following stitch, into the next, insert with 2. So there's 1, and then there's 2. Again, skip a stitch, into the next, and insert with 2 single crochets. So there's 1, and then there's 2. And that's it. We're going to continue doing this to reach the end of the row. We made our way all the way down, and our row 1 is complete. We should all have the same amount of stitches as chains that we made. Now let's get started on our 2nd row repeat, which is going to be a moss stitch row. So what we're going to do is start by chaining 2. That first chain is going to count as our turning chain. That 2nd chain is going to count as a chain, and flip our work. All we're going to do from here is skip that first stitch, into the 2nd, insert with a single crochet. And so far for this row, we should have 2 stitches, which is our chain space that we just made, and our single crochet. And we're going to continue this to reach the end. So chain 1, skip a stitch, into the next with a single crochet. Now we should all have a total of 4 stitches, so that chain space is 1, single crochet is 2, chain space is 3, single crochet is 4. And from here we're going to continue to chain 1, skip a stitch, and into the next insert with another single crochet to reach the end of the row. We are back. We have our first 2 rows complete. Now after the second row, we should still have the same amount of stitches as chains that we made. Now our third row in our 3-row repeat is going to be yet another moss stitch row. So let's just get that started. Now whenever we're starting a moss stitch row, it's always going to start with a chain 2. That first chain is going to count as our turning chain. Second chain is going to count as a chain, and again, flip your work. And just like before, we're all going to skip that first stitch, which is our single crochet from our previous row, and then single crochet into the next, which is now our chain spaces. So we're going to skip 1 into that chain space with a single crochet, giving us a total of 2 stitches so far, which is our chain space, which is right there, and then our single crochet. And again, chain 1, skip a stitch into the next with a single crochet. And that's it. We're going to continue doing this, making our way all the way down. We are back. Our first 3 rows are complete. Now at the end of our third row, we should still have the same amount of stitches as chains that we made. Now from here, it's just going to be a 3-row repeat. So let's just get started on the following rows together. Now our next row is going to be our alternate stitch row. So we're all going to chain 1 and flip. So whenever we're doing our alternate stitch row, we are going to skip that first stitch and then insert into that next stitch with our 2 singles, which is going to be our chain space in this case because our previous row was our moss stitch row. So into that second stitch, which is our chain space, insert with 2 singles. So there's 1 and then there's 2. Skip that following stitch, which is a single crochet from our previous row, and then into the next, which is our chain space, another set of 2 single crochets, and continue this to reach the end of the row. Alright, my first 4 rows are complete. My following 2 rows are going to be moss stitch rows, so let's just get those started. Remember, our moss stitch rows start with a chain 2. That first chain counts as our turning chain. Second chain counts as a chain. Flip our work. Now from here, we're going to skip that first stitch, into the next, insert with a single crochet, chain 1, skip a stitch, and single crochet into the next to reach the end of the row. Our row 5 is now complete. Now from here, we're going to chain 2, flip our work, and then get started on our following moss stitch row. So all together, we're going to skip that first stitch and into the next, which is our chain space, with another single crochet, and that's it. We're going to continue this to reach the end of the row. Alright, so we are back. All together, we have just finished up our first 6 rows. From here, it's going to be a repeat of our 3 previous rows until we have a shoulder portion that reaches roughly 2 inches past the tip of our shoulder, making sure that we're placing our first row at the tip of our shoulder. Now, I will meet you guys back right after we finish up an alternate stitch row, and then we can get started on the V-neck portion. Alrighty, so we are back. So the shoulder portion is complete for me. I have a total of 10 rows. My width is roughly 2.5 inches or 7 centimeters. Now what we're going to do from here is get started on the decrease of our neckline. So first things first, for every size, we're all going to start by inserting our stitch marker into the second stitch from the top that is opposite from where our working yarn is. And then from here, we're going to do the following row in our row sequence, which is going to be our first moss stitch row. So since we're along the bottom, we're all going to chain 2, flip our work, and then do our moss stitch all the way up until we have 4 stitches left right before our stitch marker. So we are back. We have done our first moss stitch row all the way up, and we should have all left 1, 2, 3, 4 stitches left right before our stitch marker. Now we're going to do our decrease. So what we're going to do is start with a chain 1. We're going to skip that next stitch, and then into the third to last, second, and last stitch, we're all going to do a decrease of 3 half double crochets. So we're going to yarn over, skipping that following stitch and into the next, which is the third to last, insert, pull through, into that second to last stitch, pull through, and then into that last stitch, which is right before our stitch marker, pull through for a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 loops on our hook. Then all together, we're going to yarn over and pull through all 5 of those loops. And now this row is complete. Now for this first decrease row for our neckline, we should have 4 less stitches than our previous row. And we are going to be decreasing into every row for this side of our neckline. So to get started on the following row, we're all going to chain 2 and flip because it's a moss stitch row. That first chain is still going to count as our turning chain. Second chain is still going to count as a chain. Now that our work is flipped, we're all going to skip that first stitch, which is the top of that half double crochet decrease from our previous row. Then we're going to do another decrease of 3 half double crochets. So yarn over. Like I said, we're going to skip that first stitch, and then into the next, which is our chain space, we're going to insert, pull through, next stitch, which is our single crochet, pull through, and then next stitch, which should be our chain space, and pull through, again for a total of 5 loops on our hook. Then we're going to yarn over and pull through all 5 of those loops. And so far for this row, we should have 2 stitches. It may look like just one, but remember that we did skip that first stitch, so that chain space counts as a stitch, and the top of this decrease counts as a stitch as well. Then from here, it's going to be the same moss stitch row that we've been doing. So chain 1, skip a stitch, which should be our single crochet from our previous row, into the next stitch, which is our chain space, insert with a single, and we're going to continue this to reach the end of the row. We are back. Our second decrease row for our neckline is complete. Now we should have 2 less stitches than our previous row. Then from here, we're just going to get started on our following row, which is our alternate stitch row. So per usual, chain 1, flip your work, make your way all the way down, now leaving the last 4 stitches again. We are back. Our third decrease row for our neckline is nearly finished. We have left our last 4 stitches, and now all together what we're going to do is a set of 2 decrease of 2 single crochets. So how that's going to work is we're going to insert our hook into that following stitch, pull through, into that next stitch, pull through when we have those 3 loops on our hook, yarn over, pull through all 3. That is our first decrease of 2 singles. Then we're going to do one more into the second to last and into the last stitch. So into that second to last stitch, insert your hook, pull through, and then into that last, remembering that it is that chain space, we're going to insert and pull through. Then yarn over and pull through all 3. And for this row, we should have 2 less stitches than our previous row as well. Now from here, it is going to be a repeat of our 3 previous rows until we reach mid-chest. But since this is a 3-row repeat, sometimes our alternate stitch row is going to end with our decrease of 2 single crochets, or sometimes it's going to start with it. So I'm just going to get started on the following 3 rows together. So since we just finished up our alternate stitch row, our following row is going to be our moss stitch row. So we're going to chain 2 and flip. Now to do this decrease row, we're going to skip that first stitch into the next. Start with a decrease of 3 half doubles, so insert, pull through, following, pull through, following, pull through for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 loops on our hook. So yarn over, pull through all 5, and now the first 2 stitches for this row is complete. Then from here, chain 1, skip a stitch and into the next with a single, and continue this to reach the end of the row. We are back, and now our 4th row for our neckline decrease is complete. Now, since we're along the bottom, we're just going to get started on the following row, which is our second moss stitch row. So chain 2, flip your work, make your way all the way up, leaving the last 4 stitches so we can decrease together. We are back with our second moss stitch row. We should all have 4 stitches left. Now we're going to do our decrease. So to do this decrease, we're all going to chain 1, which as you guys can see, I already did mine. We're going to skip that following stitch, which is that 4th to last stitch. Now all together, we're going to yarn over. Into that 3rd to last, pull through, 2nd to last, pull through, and then into that last, which remember is that chain space, pull through for 5 loops on our hook, then yarn over, pull through all 5. Now this row is complete. Now let's just get started on our following row. So chain 1 and flip. Now to get started on our following alternate stitch row that starts with a decrease, what we're going to do is skip that first stitch, which is the top of that decrease from our previous row, into the next, which is our chain space. We're going to start with a decrease of 2 singles, so insert, pull through, into that following stitch, pull through, then yarn over, pull through all 3 loops on our hook. We're going to do a second decrease of 2 singles, so into that next stitch, which is our chain space, pull through, stitch after that, pull through, 3 loops on our hook, so yarn over, pull through all 3. Then from here, we're going to do our alternate stitch per usual. So just into that following stitch, which it should be our chain space, insert with 2 singles. So there's 1, there's 2, skip a stitch, which is our single crochet from our previous row, and then into the next, which is our chain space, another set of 2 single crochets. Then I'll meet you back at the end of the row. We are back. The first 6 rows of our neckline is complete. Now all we're going to do from here is just continue to repeat these 6 rows until this neckline portion can reach, making sure that we're placing this first shoulder row at the tip of our shoulder all the way over to mid-chest. And I'll meet you guys back right after our second moss stitch row that ends along the bottom. We are back with the decrease half of our neckline. I have a total of 30 rows. My width is roughly 7.5 inches or 19 centimeters. Now we can get started on the other side of our front panel. But right before we do that, we're all going to have to do one middle row, and that is going to be our alternate stitch row with no increases and no decreases. So since we all should be along the bottom, what we're going to do is our alternate stitch row with no increases and no decreases, making our way all the way up. We should end up with the same amount of stitches as this last row that we have right here. And then once when that middle row is complete, I'll meet you back so we can get started on the increase. So we are back. Our middle row is complete. That didn't have any increases or decreases. That was our alternate stitch row. And once when that middle row is completed, we do want to make sure that we're inserting a stitch marker into the top of that row, just so we know where the middle of our front panel is. Now we can get started on the increase side of our front panel. So our following row is going to be a moss stitch row. So all we're going to do is chain 2, the same way that we normally would, starting a moss stitch row, and flip our work. So once when our work is flipped, what we're going to do, since this is a moss stitch row, we're going to skip that first stitch the same way that we pretty much normally would. And then into that next stitch, we're all going to do an increase of 3 single crochets. So into that second stitch, insert with 1 single, into that same stitch with a second single, same stitch with a third. And so far for everyone, we should have a total of 4 stitches for this row. That first stitch is that chain space when we skip that first stitch, and then 2, 3, 4. That is the increase that we just did. Then we're going to finish up this moss stitch row per usual. So chain 1, skip a stitch into the next with a single crochet, and continue on with our normal moss stitch detail to reach the end of the row, and we should end up with 2 more stitches than our previous row. We are back. Our first increase row is complete. Now let's get started on the following row, which is yet another moss stitch row, and that's going to start off with a chain 2, flip your work. Do our regular moss stitches all the way down until we all have 2 stitches left. And as a really quick tip, we do want to make sure that we are counting that chain space that we made before we did our increase. So we are back. Our second increase row is nearly finished. We've made our way all the way up and left the last 2 stitches. Now what we're going to do is our increase. So since we should all have 2 stitches left, we're all going to chain 1, which is per usual with our moss stitch, and then into that last chain space, we're going to insert with an increase of 3. Now that increase of 3 is going to be 1 single, 1 half double, and 1 double crochet all into that same stitch, because if we have too many rows with increase of 3s, that could eventually start to curve in on us. So what we're going to do is into that last stitch, insert with a single crochet, into that same last stitch with a half double crochet, then into that same last stitch with a double crochet, and now our second increase row is complete. Now let's get started on our following row, which is going to be an alternate stitch row. So we're all going to chain 2 now and flip our work. Now whenever we're doing our alternate stitch row that starts along the top, what we're going to do is skip that first stitch, and then into that next stitch, we're going to do an increase. And into that stitch, we're going to be doing 1 double, 2 half doubles, and then now a single. So yarn over. Skip that first stitch like I said. Into that second, insert with a double crochet. Into that same stitch with 2 half double crochets, so there's 1. Into that same stitch, there is a second. And then into that same stitch, there is a single crochet. Now so far we should have 4 stitches for this row. Then from here we're going to skip that following stitch, and then into the stitch right after that, which should be a chain space from our previous row, we're going to insert with 2 single crochets like how we would with our normal alternative stitch. So into that chain space, insert with 1, into that same space, insert with a second, and we're going to continue on with this to reach the end of the row. We are back. The first 3 rows for the increase side of our neckline is complete. Now it is going to be a repeat of these 3 rows, but kind of like how the decrease side works, the alternate stitch row may start
or end with an increase. So I'm just going to do the following set with you guys to show you both of those examples. So everyone's following row should be a moss stitch row. So all we're going to do, since we should all be along the bottom, is chain 2, flip our work, and do our moss stitch row all the way up until we all have 2 stitches left. And I actually have already made my way up until I had 2 stitches left. So we're going to do this increase together. So whenever we're doing an increase at the end of our moss stitch row, all we're going to do is chain 1, skip that second to last stitch, and then into that last stitch, insert with our increase. Now this increase is going to be a single, a half double, and a double crochet. And now that this row is complete, we're going to get started on our second moss stitch that starts with an increase as well. So we're going to chain 2 and flip. Now whenever we're starting the row off with a moss stitch, we're going to skip that first stitch, and then into the second, we're all going to do an increase of 3 single crochets. So we're going to skip that first stitch, and into the second, insert with 1, with 2, and then with 3 single crochets. So far for everyone, no matter what size we're making, we should all have a total of 4 stitches. That first is that chain space, and then the 1, 2, 3 stitches that we just did for the increase. Then after that increase, we are going to chain 1, skip a stitch, and into the next, which should be a chain space for everyone, insert with a single crochet, and continue on with our moss stitch per usual. Alright, so our first 5 rows of the increase portion of our neckline is complete. We're going to finish up with our 6. It is going to be an alternate stitch row for everyone. So from where we're at, chain 1, flip our work, and then do our alternate stitch row all the way up, leaving the last 2 stitches, remembering that that last stitch is the chain 1 space, and then the second to last stitch is the first stitch from our increase from our previous row. Alrighty, so we are back. We are nearly finished with our row 6. We should all have 2 stitches left, so now let's do our increase together. So what this increase is going to be is into that last stitch from our previous row. It's going to be a single, 2 half doubles, and a double. So we're going to skip that second to last stitch, and then into that last stitch, a single, 2 half doubles, so there's 1, and here's a second, and then a double crochet all into that last stitch. And so far, this is what we should all have for the increase side of our front panel. All we're going to do is continue to repeat our 6 previous rows until we have the same amount of rows as the decreased rows that we have, making sure that we're not including that middle row. And then once we do, I'll meet you guys back so we can get started on the second shoulder portion. But just as a really quick tip, every row that we have should have 2 more stitches than our previous row, just to make sure that we're all ending on the correct amount of stitches. I'll meet you guys back once when this side of our neckline is complete. I am back. The increase side of my neckline is complete. Now we're going to finish up with our shoulder portion. So we all should have ended along the top. What we're going to do from here is make a chain 2 because we skipped a total of 2 stitches on this side for every size. And here is my chain 1 and chain 2. Now from here, we're going to get started on our shoulder portion, starting with our following row. So the following row in our row sequence should be an alternate stitch row for everyone. So after that chain 2, we're going to chain an additional 1, and that's going to count as our turning chain, and I'm just going to get started on the following row with you. Now we have done our chain 1 and flipped our work. Now we're going to do our alternate stitches. So getting this started, into that third chain from our hook, we're going to insert with our first alternate stitch. So here's 1, here's 2, here's 3. Into that last chain, we're going to insert with 2 single crochets. So there's 1, and into that same chain, there's 2. Then continue on with our alternate stitch row to reach the end of the row. So skip a stitch, into the next, another set of 2 single crochets, and that's it. Our following 2 rows are going to be 2 moss stitch rows. Then we're going to continue to repeat our 3 previous rows with no increases and no decreases until we have the same amount of rows as the first shoulder portion. Once we do a chain up of 1 and cut, and then I'll meet you back. Alrighty, so we are back. The entirety of my front panel is complete. Now this total width is roughly 15.5 inches or 39 centimeters. I did do a chain up of 1 and cut right after my last row, and now we're going to get started on the back panel. Now the back panel is going to be pretty simple, so I'm actually just going to talk you guys through it. We're all going to start by making the same even number chain that we made when we got started on the front panel shoulder. Then all we're going to do is continue to do our alternate stitch and 2 moss stitch row repeats with absolutely no increases and no decreases for the same amount of rows that we have for the front panel. And then once we have the total width of our back panel completed, I'll meet you guys back so we can seam the front and back panel together. Alright, so we are back. Once we have both the front and the back panel completed, we're now going to seam our shoulders together. So first things first, we're all going to start by laying our front panel on top of our back panel. Then we're going to be inserting our hook into the top corner stitch of both the front and the back. We're all going to yarn over and pull through and do a chain up of 1 to secure. Then we're all going to do a single crochet row, putting 1 single crochet into every side row. So finding our first side row, this is mine right here. I'm going to find that top loop, insert my hook into the front panel, find the same top loop within the back panel, insert your hook in through that top loop, and we're going to single crochet around everything. Again, finding that first side row within the front panel, I'm going to insert in through that top loop, find the first side row within the back panel, insert in through that top loop with a single. And that's pretty much it. Let's just do one more together. Finding that next side row within the front panel, find that top loop, find the next top loop within the back panel, insert your hook in through there with a single crochet, and that's it. We're going to continue on with our single crochet row until we don't have any more side rows left to work into. We should all have the same amount of stitches as shoulder rows that we did, and then once we have that, do a chain up of 1 and cut, and then repeat on the other side. Alrighty, so we are back. Our shoulders are all seamed up. The next thing we're going to do is seam our sides. So first things first, we're all going to make sure that our work is still flipped wrong side out, meaning the seam that we have for the shoulders is still along the outside. Then from there, we're going to be inserting our stitch marker into any stitch from the top that is in multiples of 3, the width that we'd like for our armhole to be. Now I would like for this to be a comfy armhole fit, so I inserted my stitch marker into the 27th stitch from the top. That's roughly 7 inches or 18 centimeters. But if you would like for yours to be a little bit wider, insert your stitch marker lower, or if you like a little bit tighter, insert your stitch marker higher. Once we have our stitch marker into place, we're then going to insert our hook into the bottom corner stitch of both the front and the back panel. Insert your yarn onto your hook, pull through, do a chain up of 1 to secure, and now we're going to do a single crochet seam. So start with finding that first stitch into the front panel. This is mine right here. Find that next stitch into the back panel. This is mine. Then we're going to single crochet. But for those of you that don't wish to weave in your tail ends later, like me, go ahead and just place your tail ends over your hook. Now we're going to do a normal single crochet around everything. And that is our first single crochet seam. Let's just do one more. Finding that next stitch into the front panel, insert in through that loop. Next stitch into the back panel, insert in through there, and single crochet around everything, and continue doing this until we reach our stitch marker. Once we do a chain up of 1 and cut, repeat on the other side, and then I'll meet you back to get started on the length of our sleeve. We are back. Everything is all seamed up, and now we're ready to get started on the length of our sleeve. So first things first, we're going to make sure that our work is now flipped right side out, meaning all of our seams are along the inside. Then we're going to be inserting our hook into the stitch that we have that's nearest to our side seam within our armhole, and then we're going to make an even number chain the length that we'd like for our sleeve to be, so you can make this as long or as short as you'd like. Now I'd like for mine to be a full length sleeve, so I'm going to make a chain of 64, that's roughly 17 inches or 43 centimeters. Now once we have our chain, we're all going to get started on our first row, which is going to be the same row sequence as the body, and that is going to be an alternate stitch row. So block off that last chain and do a chain 1. Now that chain 1 doesn't count as a stitch, that's our turning chain. What we're going to do from here is do our first alternate stitch set into the 3rd chain from our hook. So here's the first, here's the second, the one that we blocked off, and then the 3rd is this one right here. Bring your hook down into that chain with 1 single crochet, and then into that same chain with a 2nd single crochet. And per usual, skip a stitch into the next and another set of 2 single crochets. And continue on with this until we all have 2 chains left, and I'll meet you back so we can do our increase. So we are back. We have made our way all the way down with our row 1, and we have left our last 2 stitches. Now what we're going to do for our increase is pretty much the same way that we did the increases for the body portion when it came to our alternate stitch rows. So what that's going to be is into that last chain, it's going to be a single, 2 half doubles, and then 1 double. So let's do that together. You're going to skip that second to last chain and then into the last, starting with 1 single, into that same chain with 2 half doubles. There's my first, and into that same one, there's my second, and then a double crochet into that same chain. Now we're going to connect it into the base. So how this is going to work is just finding that next available stitch into the base and insert with a slip stitch. And now our row 1 is connected, and remember that that slip stitch into the base doesn't actually count as a stitch. Then we need to work our way up to the following row. So finding that next available stitch into the base, we're going to insert with a slip stitch and flip our work. Now when it comes to doing our sleeves, we are only going to be doing increases and decreases into the alternate stitch rows. So the moss stitch rows won't have any stitches into them. So how that's going to work. Getting started on any moss stitch row that starts along the base, we are always going to start that row with a chain 1, skipping that first stitch from our previous row, making sure that we're not counting those slip stitches into the base. So we're going to skip that first one and then into that next one, insert with a single crochet, and altogether we should have 2 stitches so far for this row. 1 is that chain space, 2 is that single crochet. Then continue on with the moss stitch row per usual. So chain 1, skip a stitch, and into the next with a single crochet. And we're going to continue on with this till we reach the end of the row. We are back and our row 2 is complete. Now for our row 2, since we didn't do any increases or decreases, we should have the same amount of stitches as our row 1. Now our following row is going to be a moss stitch row because we are still following the same row sequence. So what we're going to do is chain 2 and flip our work since we're along the outside. Then per usual, we're going to skip that first stitch and into the next, insert with a single crochet, chain 1, skip a stitch, single crochet, and that's it. Continue this to reach the end of the row, and at the end of this row, we should still have the same amount of stitches as our previous row. We are nearly finished with our row 3. We're now going to connect it into the base. So what we're going to do is slip stitch into that following stitch into the base. So it's done pretty much the same way as our previous rows. Now from here it is going to be a repeat of our 3 previous rows, but like I said in one of our previous clips, the alternate stitch row can start or end with an increase. So I'm just going to be doing the following 3 rows with you just to make sure we have it down. So in order to work our way up to the following row, slip stitch into that next available stitch into the base and flip your work. Now how we're going to do an increase for our alternate stitch row whenever we're starting along the base is it's going to be a double, 2 half double, and 1 single crochet into the second stitch. So yarn over, preparing for a double crochet. That first stitch is our single crochet from our previous row, making sure we're not counting those slip stitches into the base. And into that next stitch is where we're going to do our increase, which is our chain space. So like I said, it's going to be 1 double, 2 half doubles, so there's 1, there's 2, and then 1 single crochet, and now this increase is complete. Now we're going to continue on with our alternate stitch sets till we reach the end of the row. So per usual, skip a stitch and into the next, which should be our chain space, insert with 2 singles, and continue this to reach the end of the row. We are back. Our first 4 rows are complete. Now we're going to get started on our following row, which is a moss stitch row, again with no increases and no decreases. So just to get that started, we're all going to start off our moss stitch row with a chain 2 since we're along the outer edge, flip our work, skip that first stitch, and then into the next, insert with a single crochet, and continue this to reach the end of the row. We are back. We have made our way down with our moss stitch row, which was our row 5. We're going to connect it into the base, which again is done the same way. So slip stitch into that next stitch into the base. Then to work our way up to our next row, which is another moss stitch row, slip stitch into that next stitch into the base and flip our work. Now just to get started on this moss stitch row, we're all going to chain 1, skip that first stitch, and then into the next stitch, which is our chain space, insert with a single, and that's it. We're going to continue on with this to reach the end of the row. We are back. Our first 6 rows are complete. Now all we're going to do from here is continue to repeat our 6 previous rows until we reach the last stitch that we have that's right before our shoulder seam. Then once we have that, I will meet you guys back so we can do the decrease side of our sleeve. So we are back. The increase side of my sleeve is complete. Now working our way down the other side of our sleeve, it's going to be done pretty much the same way, but instead of increases into our alternate stitch rows, we are now going to be doing decreases. Now everyone's following row should be an alternate stitch row. but some of us may have ended along the base and some of us may have ended along the outer edge. I will be doing both of the decreases with you just as a refresher, but for those of you that are along the base like me, what we are going to do is slip stitch into that following stitch into the base, which should be the stitch on the other side of our shoulder seam, and flip our work. So for those of us that are starting off our alternate stitch row along the base, we're going to decrease this the same way that we decrease the neckline. So what we're going to do is skip that first stitch and then start with a decrease of 2 single crochets. So still making sure we're not counting any of those slip stitches into the base, our first stitch should be a single crochet for everyone. So that's going to be the stitch that we're skipping. And then into the next, which is going to be our chain space, we're going to insert and pull through. And then into our following stitch, insert and pull through for 3 loops on our hook. Then yarn over, pull through all 3, and then we're going to be doing another decrease. So into that next stitch that we have, which should be a chain space, pull through, then into that following stitch, insert, pull through for 3 loops on our hook again, then yarn over and pull through all 3, and then from here we're going to do an alternate stitch per usual. So just into that following stitch, which should be a chain space, we're going to insert with 1, 2 single crochets, skip a stitch, and into the next with 2 single crochets. And we're going to continue doing this to reach the end of the row. Now once we do, our following 2 rows is going to be a moss stitch row for everyone. Now we still aren't doing any increases or decreases into those rows, so get those following 2 rows completed, and then I'll meet you back to do the next decrease for our alternate stitch row. Alright, so I'm back with the decrease side of my sleeve. I finished up my first decrease row that, for me, started along the base, then did my following 2 moss stitch rows, again with no increases and no decreases. Now, for my following row, I started along the outer edge, and for those of you that are actually along the outer edge right now, just do our regular alternate stitch row, making our way all the way down, leaving the last 4 stitches. Now, as you guys can see, I have already done that portion of my row, so now we're just going to do a decrease together. So we're going to insert our hook into that 4th to last stitch, pull through, and into that 3rd to last, pull through. For 3 loops on our hook, that's our 1 decrease of 2 single crochets, and then another decrease of 2 single crochets into the last 2 stitches. So into that 2nd to last, pull through, last, pull through all 3, then we're going to connect it into the base the same way that we've been doing. So just find that next stitch into the base and insert with a slip stitch. And that's it. Our following 2 rows are going to be a moss stitch row. Then we're just going to be continuing to repeat our 6 previous rows, making our way all the way down. When we don't have any more stitches left to work into, I will meet you guys back so we can seam up our sleeve together. We are back. The entirety of our sleeve is complete. Now what we're going to do from here is seam it all up together, but I have actually already seamed mine together. All this is going to be is a single crochet seam. So we've already gotten this done, kind of like how we did the side seams. So we're all going to start by making sure that our work is flipped wrong side out, and then we're going to insert our hook into the corner stitch of both the front and the back panel, then do our single crochet seam all the way down. When we don't have any more stitches left to work into, do a chain up of 1 and cut. So what we're going to do from here, now that our sleeve is all seamed up, we're going to get started on the cuff. So making sure that our work is now flipped right side out, right side up, we're all going to insert our hook into any one of the side rows that we have along the edge of our sleeve. Then we're going to do a single crochet row. We are going to insert our yarn onto our hook, pull through, and start with a chain of 1 that's just as secure. Then what we're going to do is 1 single crochet into every other side row. So start by finding our first side row. This is mine right here. I'm going to insert with just 1 single crochet. This is my next side row, so I'm going to skip over that one, and then into my following side row, insert with a single. Again, skip that following side row, and into the next with a single crochet, and that's it. We're going to continue doing this, making our way all the way around. When we don't have any more side rows left to work into, slip stitch into that chain space. Alright, so now that our single crochet row is complete, we're now all going to make a chain the length that we'd like for our cuff to be. Now I'd like for mine to be roughly 3 inches or 8 centimeters, so I'm going to start by making a chain 12. So now that we have our chain, we're all going to block off that last chain and do a chain 1. Now that chain 1 doesn't count as a stitch, that's our turning chain. Now we're going to be putting 1 slip stitch into every chain. So into that chain that we blocked off, or the second chain from our hook, insert with a slip stitch. So all we're going to do is insert our hook. When we have those 2 loops on our hook, we're going to gently yarn over and pull through both loops on our hook. That is our first slip stitch. Let's do this again. Into that next chain, insert your hook, yarn over, and gently pull through both loops again. And that's it. We're going to continue to do our slip stitches all the way down. And as a really quick tip, make sure that we are not tugging too tightly after every stitch, otherwise the following row can be a little too tight to work into. Alright, so now that we've put one slip stitch into every chain, we're now going to connect it into the base. So how we're going to do that is pretty much the same way that we connected our sleeves into the base. So just start by finding that next available stitch into the base, insert into there with a slip stitch. Remember that slip stitch into the base doesn't count as a stitch. Then to work our way up to the following row, slip stitch into that next stitch into the base, still does not count as a stitch, and flip our work. Now from here we are going to be putting one back loop slip stitch into every stitch. So finding the last stitch from our previous row, remembering not to work into any of those slip stitches into the base, we're going to find that back loop, then yarn over, pull through everything on our hook. Again, into that next stitch's back loop, insert, yarn over, and gently pull through everything, and that's it. We're going to continue with one back loop slip stitch into every stitch. Then at the end of the row, we're going to chain one, flip our work, and then put one back loop slip stitch into every stitch, and then I'll meet you back at the base so we can connect it just once more. So we're back. We have our first 3 rows completed. Now we're going to connect it into the base together, and that is going to be done the same way that we did our previous rows. So as a refresher, find that next stitch into the base, insert with a slip stitch. Then to work our way up to the following row, find that next stitch into the base, slip stitch into there, flip our work, and then put one back loop slip stitch into every stitch. From here, we're going to continue to repeat our 2 previous rows, again with no increases and no decreases, until we don't have any more stitches left to work into. When we don't, I'll meet you guys back so we can seam everything together. Alright, so we've made our way all the way around with our cuff. We don't have any more stitches left to work into. So now what we're going to do is seam it all up together. And this is going to be an outside loop slip stitch seam. So let's all make sure that our work is still flipped right side out, right side up. So what we're going to do is find that first stitch into the front panel and insert only into that front loop. Next, we're going to find that next stitch into the back panel and insert only into that back loop. Then when we have those 3 loops on our hook, we're all going to yarn over and pull through all 3. Let's do that again. Next stitch into the front panel, insert into that front loop. Next stitch into the back panel, insert into that back loop. Pull through all 3, and once more, next stitch into the front. Next stitch into the back, pull through all 3. We're going to continue doing this, making our way all the way down. When we don't have any more stitches left to work into, do a chain up of 1 and cut, and then repeat everything we did here on the other side. Alrighty, so we are back. Both of our sleeves and cuffs are all finished up. Now what we're going to do from here is our collar. So first things first, we're all going to make sure that our work is still flipped right side out, right side up. And the next thing we're going to do is insert our hook into the stitch that we have that's nearest to our shoulder seam within the front panel. Now working within the front panel, we have a bunch of decrease and increase rows to work into. What we're going to do is put 2 single crochets into every side row. So let's get this started. So we're all going to start by inserting our yarn onto our hook. Now for every single size, we should have 2 stitches right before we start working into our side row. So just put 1 single crochet into each. And then once we reach our first side row, I've already done my single crochets. Once we reach our first side row, we're going to insert with 2 single crochets. So just find that top loop and insert with 2 singles. So here's my top loop, here's 1. And then into that same top loop of the same side row, here is my second single crochet. Let's do that again. This is my following side row, so I'm going to find that top loop and insert with 2 single crochets. So there's 1, and then there is 2. Let's just do 1 more together. This is my following side row, so find that top loop and insert with 2 singles. So there is 1, and then there is 2, and that's it. We're going to continue doing this, making our way all the way down until we reach our stitch marker stitch within the middle. We are back. We made our way down one side of our front panel, and now we are at our middle stitch marker stitch. All we're going to do into that one is just insert 1 single crochet into the top of that middle row. So just insert in through there with 1, and don't forget, we do need to insert our stitch marker back into the top of that stitch so we know where the middle is. Then from here, continue with 2 single crochets into every side row, making our way all the way up. Then once we reach the top, we should have 2 available stitches, 1 single crochet into each of those as well, and then I'll meet you back to work across the back. Now working into the top of the back panel, all we're going to do is put 1 single crochet into every side row, so that's going to be pretty simple. Just find that first available side row, find that top loop and insert with 1 single. Into the next, find that top loop and insert with another single, and that's it. We're going to continue doing this until we don't have any more stitches left to work into. When we don't, slip stitch into that chain space. Then do a chain up of 1 and cut, and then I'll meet you back to get started on the collar. Alrighty, so we are back. Our single crochet row is complete. Now we're going to get started on our collar. So we're all going to make sure that our work is still flipped right side out, right side up, and then we're all going to start by inserting our hook into the second stitch away from our middle stitch marker stitch, making sure it's only within the front loop. So this is my middle stitch. We're going to count 1, count 2. Into that second stitch, insert your hook only in through that front loop, then insert your yarn onto your hook, pull through, and we're going to start with a front loop double crochet row, working into our stitch marker stitch and to the left. So what we're all going to do is yarn over, and starting with our stitch marker stitch, we're going to insert only in through that front loop, and we do want to keep that stitch marker into place just so we know where the middle is when we make our way back around. And we're going to insert only in through that front loop, and then do a double crochet per usual. So yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. Then from here, continue with front loop double crochets for the total width that we'd like for the entirety of the collar to be. So let's just do 1 more front loop double crochet together, yarn over, into that next stitch, insert only in through that front loop with a double crochet. Now I would like for my band to be roughly 2 inches or 5 centimeters, so I will do a total of 10 front loop double crochets. So we are back. My front loop double crochets are complete. Now we're going to be doing back loop double crochets for the rest of our collar. So at the end of the row, we're all going to chain 3 and flip our work. Then all we're going to do is put 1 back loop double crochet into every stitch. So yarn over, into that first stitch's back loop, pull through 2, pull through 2, and continue this until we reach the base. And we should all end up with the same amount of stitches as our previous row. We are back and our first 2 rows are complete, and now we're going to connect it into the base. So how that's going to work is we're all going to start by counting up the next 2 available stitches into the base. So we're all going to start by counting up 1, counting up 2. When we connect our row, we all want to make sure that we're inserting it in through the back loop or the loop that's closest to the outside of our piece, because we want to leave the inside stitches so we can seam it together easier. So again, I'm going to skip 1 and into that second, insert into that back loop only, then yarn over and pull through everything. Now that slip stitch into the base doesn't count as a stitch, and now our row 2 is connected. Then to get started on our row 3 is we're all going to slip stitch into the following 2 stitches into the base, making sure it's still within the back loops. So into that next available stitch into the base, into that back loop, insert with a slip stitch, and then into that next stitch into the base, insert with another slip stitch. Now none of those slip stitches into the base count as a stitch, and flip our work. And now that our work is flipped, we're going to be putting 1 back loop double crochet into every stitch. So just to do the first, yarn over, finding the last stitch from our previous row, not into any of those slip stitches into the base. We're going to insert with a back loop double crochet and continue with 1 back loop double crochet into every stitch till we reach the end of the row. We are back. We should all have a total of 1, 2, 3 rows completed. And now all we're going to do from here is continue to repeat our 2 previous rows, making our way all the way up and around. Now I will meet you guys back once we're worked into our edge front loop double crochet right here, just to show you where we're going to be inserting our hook underneath this row, but it's all going to be done pretty much the same way. So I'll meet you guys back when we make our way all the way around to this last stitch right over here. So we are back. We have made our way all the way around with our collar. We are worked into the stitch that's right before our first front loop double crochet stitch, and if you're just 1 stitch before or into the stitch that's right before, that is completely fine as well. All we're going to do is just continue to do what we've been doing this entire time, but now working
into the available stitches that we left for ourselves because we worked into the front loops. And then I'll meet you back once we reach our middle stitch marker stitch. So we are back. We have just finished up working into the stitches underneath the beginning of our collar, and now we have made our way all the way down to our middle stitch marker stitch. Now what we're going to do is seam it all up together. So first things first, we're going to make sure that our work is flipped wrong side out so that all of our seams are going to be on the same side. As you guys can see, I have already flipped mine. And then what we're going to do from here is do our seam. Now this is going to be the same single crochet seam that we did for the sleeves and for the sides, but it may be a little bit different for everyone depending on whether if you guys ended along the base or ended along the outer edge. Now for those of you that are lucky enough to have ended along the base, that's super simple for you guys. What you guys are going to do is just insert your hook into that first stitch, into the collar, into that first stitch, into the base, and then just do our normal single crochet seam. Now for those of you that have ended along the outer edge like me, what we are going to do is count out the same amount of stitches that we made for our first row. So for me, that was 10. So counting from my stitch marker stitch, I'm going to count these available stitches that we have and insert my hook into the 10th stitch because that's the amount of stitches that I have. Then we can do our single crochet seam. But either way, I'll meet you guys back once when the seam is complete. All right, so we are back. Our collar is all finished up, and now we're going to finish up with our bottom band. So first things first, we're all going to start with a single crochet row. So, making sure that our work is still flipped right side out. Right side up, we're going to be inserting our hook into any one of the side rows that we have along the bottom of our piece. Then this part's going to be pretty simple. I'm just going to talk you guys through it. We're going to make our way all the way around, putting one single crochet into every side row, and then I'll meet you guys back. We are back. Our single crochet row is complete. Now all we're going to do from here is our back loop slip stitch rows, pretty much the same way that we did the cuff. So I'm just going to talk you guys through the bottom band. After we've slip stitched into that chain space, all we're going to do is make a chain the length that we'd like for the bottom band to be. I'd like for mine to be roughly 4 inches or 10 centimeters, so I'm going to start by making a chain 20. Then we're just going to do our back loop slip stitch rows the same exact way that we did the cuffs. It's not going to have any increases or decreases, so just continue that, and when we don't have any more stitches left to work into, I'll meet you guys back so we can seam everything together. Alright, we are back. Our bottom band is complete. Now what we're going to do from here is just seam it all together, and since we already know how to do this seam, which is going to be the same as our cuff, I'm just going to talk you guys through it. So it is going to be an outside loop slip stitch seam, so making sure that our work is flipped right side out. Right side up, we're all going to be inserting our hook into the corner stitch of both the front and the back panel, do our outside loop slip stitch seam, then do a chain up of 1 and cut, and then we'll be all done. And then once when that is all finished, we are all finished with our piece. The last thing we have to do is just weave in all of our ends. There you have it. Hope y'all enjoyed the tutorial. Join us on Instagram, Pinterest, or Twitter. Those links are down below. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Catch y'all on the next one. Bye!